Looking at the void in myself and feeling what's missing. Better watch the way you going, better go in the right direction. In the moment you stressing, but you gon' be counting blessings. And I know that for certain. Keep on working, open curtains, haters swerving, cause they ain't ready for your final version. Whoa. I'm never gonna give up, fall down, I just gotta get up, yeah. Cause this is my road, lights, camera, action, I'm ready to go. I'm never gonna give up, fall down, I just gotta get up, yeah. Yeah, this is my road, lights, camera, action, I'm ready to go. Way too long, we faced them storms, now you gon' face the dawn you waited for. I said from night
You are listening to The Tom Ficklin Show on WNHH LP 103.5 FM, broadcasting live from downtown New Haven. We are streaming live on TuneIn Radio and newhavenindependent.org. We are also streaming live video on Facebook Live. Just go to facebook.com/newhavenindependent or just go to your Facebook page and look us up.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you for that intro. There's so many ways for folks to access the show and access information these days. So by the virtue of working with WNHH 103.5 FM, we're really able to kind of not necessarily only archive the show, but broadcast actually worldwide. We have listeners from different time zones and even from Australia, where it's tomorrow. So Australia's getting a sneak peek at what we're up to. What we're up to on the show almost consistently is just providing what sharing and illustrating what is health and wealth and well-being mean in this day and age in our world. We don't always talk about as many global geopolitical issues, but everything is somewhat political and economic. And I start off in this kind of macro way, because although we're going to talk about something called ketamine, which you may not have heard that word before, Ketamine, ketamine, and for the treatment of depression and Parkinson's disease is the topic today. But really, where is this world going in terms of the scientific discoveries? Often you think of Columbus as making a scientific discovery. I'm not trying to make a judgment. I'm just saying that as evolution and medicine and history unfolds, we're on this journey here on this planet to really see if we can survive and be healthy and well. And so in terms of the focus of being healthy and well today, the topic is ketamine for the treatment of depression and Parkinson's disease. And we're really honored to have Dr. Sophie E. Holmes with us. She's an associate professor of psychiatry, assistant professor of neurology at Yale School of Medicine. Reverend Dr. Leroy O. Perry has joined us as well. He's the pastor of St. Stephen's AME Zion Church and cultural ambassador to the Yale Clinical Research Program. I believe Reverend Clayton might be joining us, correct, everybody? Reverend Clayton might be joining us as well, pastor of Walters Memorial AME Zion Church and cultural ambassador to the Yale Clinical Research Program. People may say Parkinson's disease and maybe think of Muhammad Ali in that regard, but not only just celebrities, but people in your family, in your church, in your home, just sort of seeing people on movies. So it's really important to do this show about Parkinson's, because it does have an impact everywhere in some way or the other. As I mentioned, Dr. Holmes is an assistant professor of psychiatry and neurology, and she's also, I was kidding her before the show started, a recent recipient of the Raphaelson Young Investigators Award from the International College of Neuropsychopharmacology. She's also been recognized for her research in synaptic deficits in major depression. More impressively, for contributing to the first human evidence that the rapid antidepressant ketamine rapidly restores synaptic integrity in depressed patients with synaptic deficits. Dr. Holmes, I'm not sure if I have Parkinson's, but I know I can sometimes be depressed. But I guess I'm not going to be eligible for this particular clinical trial. But we'll see what happens. In her relatively new career, and as I mentioned, stellar career, she's already made incredible contributions to our understanding of neurobiology, the brain, the synaptics. Just what's cooking with our consciousness. So Dr. Holmes, welcome. It's good to see you.
Thank you so much, and thank you for that introduction.
Good.
Humbling. Thank you.
Well, you deserve it. I mean, I could have spent the next 50 minutes reading about your articles and your contributions. But yeah. Tell us a little bit about the study of ketamine as an antidepressant in patients with Parkinson's disease. We have about 45 or so minutes. Kind of unpack it and just clarify with folks what's cooking.
I'd love to. So Parkinson's disease, when most people think of the disease, they think of the motor symptoms, right? The symptoms that affect movement, because it's primarily a movement disorder. So it affects people's ability to walk and initiate movement, and can cause tremor, as well as postural instability. So they're the motor symptoms, but we now know that there are these non-motor symptoms that are just as debilitating as these motor symptoms, that actually they're apparent years before the motor symptoms develop, because the disease process begins, we think, around 20 years before the motor symptoms develop and diagnosis is made. And depression is one of the most significant, and it often develops around 10 years before the onset of the motor symptoms, and we think it's related to the pathology of Parkinson's itself. So it also really affects quality of life. It's depression and anxiety are among the top factors affecting people's quality of life. So it's really important that we treat it effectively. We know how important mental health is and how important it is to treat it, because it affects every aspect of life. But traditional antidepressants that are kind of serotonin based aren't always effective in Parkinson's disease. And we think that that's because they're not targeting that underlying pathology. So we think that a drug called ketamine is going to target that pathology and could be more effective and actually targeted in people with Parkinson's. So that's why we're running the trial.
Excellent. And Dr. Holmes, walk us through the context a little bit in terms of, perhaps the prevalency. Is it preventable? And you reference a connection between Parkinson's disease and depression, but again, the prevalence, and we also always hear about targeted medicine kind of thing, but is it preventable? And even people will oftentimes confuse it, I suppose, with multiple sclerosis. That people are so distracted these days with competing pieces of evidence. And Reverend Perry, I want to kind of ask you to kind of jump in soon this time, because this topic is just has so many kind of layers to it. But Dr. Holmes, yeah, talk to me about the prevalence and preventable.
So it affects around 1% of the population. But it's it's the second most common neurodegenerative disease, second to Alzheimer's. It's the fastest growing neurodegenerative disease, so the incidence is increasing. We're not entirely sure why. Some people think it's related to exposure to environmental toxins. So it's an age-related disease, so the prevalence increases after the age of 60, but around 10 to 15% of the people with Parkinson's have young onset Parkinson's, so that's when they develop the disease under the age of 50. And then the prevalence of depression in Parkinson's is about 50%, which is much higher than in the general population, which is why it's so important to understand what's going on and treat it effectively.
Reverend Perry, Dr. Holmes has already. May I call you Sophie, by the way?
You can call me Sophie, absolutely.
Right. So Sophie's already mentioned like 5 new questions in terms of what you just said. I guess I wondered whether you had any response to what you just said already, particularly in terms of the early onset and the diagnostic tools. You're still thinking. Okay. Can you? I know you're not. You're in a different location. So do we have audio with you? You're still on mute.
Yeah, I think you might be on mute.
We can't. Yeah, there we go.
All right. So I think this is such an important study for us, particularly because we get so little information, and I'm not sure if there is a stigma related to the disease itself. So folk don't really bring this up as topics of discussion.
Yeah.
And I think people are embarrassed by the fact that they do have Parkinson's. And so, unless we have these kind of conversations and we're able to bring people into the loop, this is going to be a challenge for us. So I'm just so glad Dr. Holmes is on, and that maybe we can bring exposure to the people and to the families of those who suffer with Parkinson's. And I think that's the key. I know that one of our topics for the ambassadors was we are family. So what affects one person, this doesn't just affect that one person, but the family, the community, all of us. So I'm just so glad that you could be here this morning to help us to understand. I mean, as Tom said earlier, you just opened up a can of worms for us in terms of like how we look at Parkinson's and how we look at Alzheimer's, how we look at possible medications that work and may not work, how do people sign in and sign up, what are the risks? So, I mean, it's a wide topic, and I'm just so glad to be privileged to be a part of this effort to make things better for those who are in need of this assistance right now, particularly those who, as you said, when you mentioned environment, I kept thinking about the social determinants of health. I'm saying, oh, she's right up my neighborhood now. Because, you know, and we know that environment affects asthma. We know that environment can affect cancer. And so, I mean, people don't normally look at it, but we're starting to look at zip codes. And we're starting to look at where people live and the pockets that they live in. And poverty is a deep pocket, and it's a hurtful pocket, particularly if you're seeking health care. It's a deep pocket.
Right. And we want to welcome Reverend Elvin Clayton to us as well. So Dr. Holmes, let's take the deep dive and talk to us about the design and the purpose and of the research study and how your team came to study this topic. And want to throw in at the early part of the show how people can get involved and find out more information as well. But yeah, you're an architect. You know, you're a member of the American Society of Architects, clinical trial architects now. So talk to us about the design and the research study, et cetera.
I'd love to. So I say it wasn't we, it was the people that I work with that are much more senior to me. But let's say, so John Crystal, who's the chair of psychiatry here at Yale, they began looking at this drug called ketamine in the 90s because of some inadequacies in serotonin-based antidepressants. And ketamine targets a neurotransmitter called glutamate. So they were interested in the glutamate system because that is the system that regulates emotional functioning. So they gave people ketamine, people with treatment-resistant depression, in a very small study, not knowing really what it would do. And they saw a rapid antidepressant effect, like within 2 hours, that peaked at 24 hours and that was sustained over 1 week. And they thought this was an incidental finding. Then did more studies, and then now there have been many clinical trials, and that led to the FDA approval of a version of this drug called esketamine in 2019. So that's for treatment-resistant depression, but we don't know if it works in Parkinson's disease. But because of how it works in the brain, alongside the clinical trials, there was a lot of mechanistic research to understand what it does in the brain and why it's working, why it leads to this antidepressant response. And it's been shown in preclinical work and some human work as well that it can increase the connections between neurons. And that's thought to result in neuroplasticity and the forming of new networks that can help people kind of get out of ruminative, non-adaptive thought patterns that are associated with depression. So we designed this trial to assess whether ketamine works in Parkinson's for the first time. And because Parkinson's is associated with synaptic loss, and we think that that affects mood circuitry as well, which is responsible for the mood symptoms, we think that it will be targeted and be very effective in Parkinson's. So our clinical trial, how we designed it, I love, by the way, the architecture analogy. So people come in and we assign them to receive either ketamine or placebo. So they have a screening session and then they receive ketamine or placebo twice per week for 3 weeks. And then we assess their depression as well as some other psychiatric symptoms like anxiety before and after the treatment. And we're also interested in their Parkinson's symptoms. So does this drug have either a direct effect on Parkinson's symptoms, the motor symptoms, or if we treat the depression, does that make the Parkinson's symptoms better? And that's my hypothesis, is that it will, and that mood is very important for general overall health and functioning.
Excellent. And just Dr. Holmes, about the participant requirements, and are some people eligible, not eligible? I mean, really, it's important for people to understand that clinical trials are not a haphazard approach to things.
Mm.
There, there's a method and a methodology. So I was just curious. People might want to know how you can become eligible, so to speak.
So for this
And-
study, yeah, so a diagnosis of Parkinson's disease is needed, and are experiencing symptoms of depression. So they don't need to have a formal diagnosis, because that is often secondary, which is something that I feel very strongly about, that we should advocate more for talking about mental health. So I think a lot of people with Parkinson's disease and other neurological diseases go and see their neurologists and don't necessarily bring up mental health, and that's kind of secondary. So some people might not know they have depression. So if they are experiencing any symptoms, and it's not just low mood, depression affects many things, including interest in things that people used to find enjoyable, concentration, appetite, sleep. It can affect so many things. So we would do an assessment of whether we think, someone has symptoms of depression. And they're the two main criteria. We have some exclusions, like uncontrolled significant cardiovascular disease would be an exclusion. We would assess that ourselves with an EKG and blood work. Yeah, and then in terms of what's involved, that's probably important for people to know. So it would be talking with us over the phone and talking through any concerns people have, any questions, exactly what's involved. And then coming to Yale for a screening session where we do a more comprehensive assessment and EKG blood work, and then a baseline session, which would just be remote, where we kind of ask some more questions. And then it's the infusions. So that's twice per week for 3 weeks at Yale. And then we have some post-treatment sessions.
And just before I go to you, Reverend Perry and Reverend Clayton, Dr. Holmes, at the length of time, are we like at the third inning, the fourth inning, we're at the eighth inning? How long is this process going to be, the trial going to last?
So we're at the halftime. Is that what you call it? Halftime?
Yeah.
Point. So we need 50 people, so 25 in each group, and we've just recruited our 25th, so we're halfway. And so far we don't know if people are getting the ketamine or placebo, right, because we're blinded, but we're seeing that people are getting better, and that could be hopefully related to the study drug. It could be taking part in a study, and kind of our team is really nice and like
Right.
doing something meaningful, and some people find that taking part in research is quite empowering. But either way, we're seeing that people are getting better, and we haven't seen any serious adverse events, so we're happy with the trial's progress at the halftime point.
And Reverend Clayton and Reverend Perry, just before I come to you, Dr. Holmes, again, is there any compensation per se?
There is, yeah. So we compensate for people's time. So I haven't mentioned that there's an optional portion of the trial to do imaging, brain imaging before and after, so we can really understand the mechanisms and see if we see those increases in synaptic connections, which is what we hypothesize. So if someone's taken part in the imaging, it's $2,000 reimbursement, but without the imaging, it's $1,400.
Excellent, excellent. Reverend Perry, Reverend Clayton, let's weave you in, because this is such a wide open topic. I mean, it's focused, obviously, and strategic, but just so many things come to mind. I'm just curious, Reverend Perry and then Reverend Clayton, any thoughts you might have thus far?
Well, the idea of the placebo is the question I think that folk might want to know is if they're already on a Parkinson's prescription for Parkinson's, if they are taking medication presently for it, do they stop taking that medication for the 3 weeks, or?
That's a very good question. No. So the treatment for Parkinson's is generally dopaminergic treatment. So Parkinson's targets an area of the brain that produces dopamine, and that's important for movement. So we give drugs that kind of replenish those dopamine stores in the brain. But no, we don't see any interactions with the drug that we're giving and those Parkinson's medications. So we don't ask that people withhold their medication, and we don't want people's symptoms to worsen during this trial, right? So.
Excellent. Reverend Clayton, Reverend Clayton, thanks for joining us, and you haven't missed much. I mean, we did talk about almost a Guinness Book of Records of solutions, so we'll share that with you later. But any thoughts of what you've heard thus far? And welcome this morning.
Good to be here, Tom, and Dr. Holmes. So good to see you again. I was just wondering, since you stated that that people are improving once they are in the study. That is a great and awesome thing, but are there any side effects? When I think about ketamine and some of the other uses for this particular drug, it's also used in anesthesia, if my memory is correct. So is there a sleepiness or tiredness related to the drug? And does the drug also, does it reduce pain in other parts of the body that's not related to this disease?
Great questions. So yes, ketamine, so it was originally FDA approved in 1970 as an anesthetic, and it's been used since then across medicine. It's actually used in pediatrics as well. So it's got a safe, a wide margin of safety. There are side effects transient side effects when people take ketamine. So it can result in some quite strange perceptual disturbances. So objects can take on they can seem brighter, colors can change, sounds can seem diminished or more intense. There's often what we call derealization, which is people often feel like they're in a dreamlike state. There can be symptoms of detachment from oneself and from one's body. So people do describe some strange experiences, but we know that this is what happens. And by the way, actually, I should have said, this is when we administer it at a sub-anesthetic dose. So a dose much lower than what would be needed for anesthesia. So people are awake, but having this quite strange experience, which not everyone experiences. But we know, and we assure people that about 20 minutes after the infusion, they will feel completely normal. They might feel a little tired afterwards. But yeah, because of these side effects, it's probably important to note that some people do take this drug recreationally, which is why it's very important that it's taken under medical supervision. So it's given at Yale at the Interventional Psychiatry Service where we're running this trial. They treat about 30 patients clinically with depression per day in a very safe, controlled setting, and that's very important.
Excellent. Reverend Perry?
No, I think that's an excellent question. I think that people need to know, what to expect, rather than to guess at it. And and I think just having that awareness helps to recruit people. And in terms of recruiting, I was looking at a Yale alumni magazine, and bam, I saw this incredible ad for your study. And I was saying to myself, we need to get people who are not as privileged as the alumni.
Absolutely. Yeah.
To have these kind of ads, it may be in our local newspapers, magazines, churches, flyers. And so I'm hopeful that we can work together to get that done, so that your study will have a balance, I think, of just not one group of people, but a balance of all of us.
I would absolutely love that. And that's so important. We don't want to just target people who have been to Yale.
Although some of us that have gone there are certainly depressed, whether we have Parkinson's or not. I'm not going to mention any names such as Reverend Perry, but he's found various antidotes to kind of solve that problem on Sundays and other days. Dr. Holmes, how can people reach out and find out and get contact information and just explore their kind of interest, or people they may not know that
Yeah.
may know that might be interested?
And we're more than happy to just talk people through what's involved, talk about ketamine. So yeah, we have a study phone, and we have a wonderful study team. And I think that is maybe part of the reason why people are doing so well. So the phone number is 475-287-9521. And that will get through to Sophie Elliott, another Sophie on the study team. She's our wonderful study coordinator. And then there's an email address as well, which is ketamine, which is KETAMINE PD at yale.edu.
Excellent, excellent, excellent.
And people are free to reach out to me directly as well. And the co-PI of this trial, actually, Dr. Gerard Sanakura at Yale, he's done a lot of the seminal work in ketamine. So he is running the trial with me as well. So he would be more than happy to speak with people too.
Dr. Holmes, elaborate on that, what you've just mentioned a little bit about the co investigator, and that we are using an experimental now methodology and leaning on building the teamwork. And it seems to me that although the clinical trial is underway, and correct me if I'm wrong, you still are kind of researching the clinical trial, or researching the parameters and the hypothesis even while you're underway.
Yeah. So yes, with Parkinson's disease, I would say with depression, that work has been done, and that was largely Dr. Sanakura and Dr. Crystal that led that work. But in Parkinson's disease, you're right, this is the first clinical trial. So that's why we're looking at other measures as well. And we are, someone mentioned pain. So we are looking at pain, and we are seeing some effects on pain as well. But yeah, we're looking at everything we can, and this is the first trial, but we are envisioning that we will have many follow-up larger scale trials as a result of this, so that, potentially if we see an antidepressant effect or other effects on Parkinson's, that it can be added as an indication for treating Parkinson's disease.
That's so exciting. Again, we've done a few shows on clinical trials, but just as you mentioned, that it's an evolving and continual discovery process. So I mean, this is a historic show today. So I mean, welcome to history, everybody. Reverend Jared?
Dr. Holmes, I have a question. In the study, do you see any notable differences in terms of sex, age, race? I mean, any of those things pop up as markers here in any kind of way?
So, great question. So we can't. So right now we're kind of just seeing if people, their depression scores before and after, but we're still blinded, so we don't know who's getting the ketamine or placebo. But we're absolutely going to look at those things. And right now we have a balanced, men and women. But that's something that's really important to us, is that I think our sample isn't representative of every community that is affected by Parkinson's. So we'd love to reach underrepresented communities that maybe aren't hearing about research, or have concerns about it, or just have less access to clinics.
Are women more likely to get Parkinson's than men?
No, so it's actually men are more likely to get Parkinson's than women, but it's rising in both sexes. But women are more likely to be depressed in Parkinson's than men. So, yeah.
Dr. Holmes, just when you were chatting about the men versus women and the composition in that regard, and I'm not the youngest person anymore, so sometimes these new categories of sociology categories escape me. But it seems to me that you might have men, women, and people that have fluid identities.
Yeah, we're open to that, and we'd love to be as inclusive as possible in this trial.
And so it's a slippery stroke. It's a slippery slope, but also it's a fascinating thing about what we're involved with. Too much. The award that you won. Tell us a little bit about your Raphaelson award that you won.
So John Crystal nominated me for that award, and it's in Tokyo. I'm going to go to Tokyo to accept the award, so I'm super excited about that.
Congratulations.
Now hold it. Now, you may need some chaperones.
Absolutely. Translators,
Yes,
food samplers.
I'll see what
absolutely.
I can do.
I'm sorry, carry on.
So yeah, no, I'm so excited to go to Tokyo, but also to accept the award. And that was based on my work a bit in Parkinson's, but before I got into Parkinson's research, I focused mostly on depression, some PTSD work as well, looking at synaptic density. So the density of the synapses, which are the connections between the neurons, which we've shown in depression that there's lower number of synapses, and we think that that could be related to stress. So from preclinical work, that if you chronically stress out rats, that results in a shrinkage of these neurons and lower synapses, and that we think that ketamine restores this. And so I've done an imaging study with Irina Estelis as well, showing that ketamine in some people can restore those synapses. So I think it's around that work. So I'll be presenting that as well in Tokyo. Can't wait.
I think that the fact that you have moved from the ketamine as a resistant treatment, a treatment that was brought about because there was a resistance to the normal treatment, that now that resistant question isn't there. It's now the question of how does it work with the synapse? How does it work? How can it work? And see, one of the things when we talked with Dr. Crystal earlier in one of our sessions, when he talked to us about mental health, he said that it was harder for minorities to get ketamine medically because of the fact that you had to be, first of all, be diagnosed that the treatments you had weren't working. And then secondly, the whole issue of, I guess, the hegemony, the upper class, the privilege against those. And so he said that mental health was really in a crisis in America. And poverty plays a major part in this crisis. So I'm glad that your study is breaking some barriers here, because now we're looking at people who have a particular illness. They're going to go directly to the source instead of getting 3 or 4 sources before they can even be recommended to use this source.
Yeah, that's our goal, is to break ground and get people the access to the mental health care that they need. And I know that's a huge problem, I'd say, globally. So that's actually an important segue to an extension to the trial that we've just added, and that's to offer CBT, which is cognitive behavior therapy, to people once they've finished the infusions. And this is optional if people want to do it, but so far we've found out that people really do, because getting access to psychological therapy is very hard. So we're offering 10 sessions just remotely, so over Zoom, of CBT, to see if we can sustain those effects of ketamine. Because the idea behind that is that we think we're making the brain more plastic, more malleable, more adaptive. So if we can intervene psychologically at the same time while the brain's in this, neuroplastic state, then we really think we can help people make new pathways in the brain, along with, being provided tools to help them think more adaptively and behave more adaptively. So we think that's a huge plus for the trial. We're really excited by this extension. And then once people finish the trial, we're really encouraging people to talk to their PCPs about their symptoms, to see if they can get access to the mental health care they need, which I know is a huge undertaking, but at least starting the conversation is really important.
Dr. Holmes, I was reading that Linda Ronstadt, the singer, people like her, Ozzy Osbourne, I guess that lifestyle, these singers and musicians, actresses, and so on and so forth, it's a lot of pressure, and sometimes it's self-inflicted pressure. And those two I know have Parkinson's, Is there anything that you know of that they might be interested in a study like this? And I ask that question because when you have people that are famous, it helps get the word out
Yeah,
stronger.
absolutely. I can, if you know them, I have a direct line. No, that's a really good point. So this study is actually funded by the Michael J. Fox Foundation. So we work with them to help promote the study, and also, so not just to recruit people, which is really important because we need to complete the trial, but to talk more openly about mental health and these non-motor symptoms that have, they're getting increasing, as they should, attention now, but they've been, I would say, largely on the back burner for a long time. But now people are realizing the importance. If you treat depression, that really has an impact on the disease progression as well. So it's been shown that depression can increase the disease progression or make it progress at a faster rate.
Dr. Holmes, my mind is the question that Reverend Perry posed is really, I think, so prescient in terms of the rollout infrastructure and the sustained availability. If someone has received the placebo during the study, will they be eligible after the study is over for the ketamine treatment?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So not officially as part of the trial, because we just don't have the funds for that. This is the first clinical trial, but we will do our best to facilitate people getting the treatment that they need. So we've had people take part in our trial that we don't know whether they got the ketamine or placebo, but we've facilitated them to get treated clinically under their insurance at IPS, at Interventional Psychiatry at Yale. So we don't just abandon people, and we're in constant contact with their PCP and neurologist as well about how they're doing, and we need their clearance for them to take part. So we fill them in on how they're doing, and then we give recommendations that they have to follow or not. It's up to them as their clinical team. But we recommend what would be helpful for them for their psychiatric symptoms.
Excellent. Reverend Perry is writing his essay, his chapter on clinical trials. So if you'd be willing to share some of the notes that you've been writing down, Reverend Perry.
No, I was just thinking that in the 70s, there was a cognitive therapy, behavioral therapy treatment that people were jumping the bandwagon left and right. And then all of a sudden it just disappeared. It's like, and now it's back, which I think is interesting. That, I guess, I don't know whether it was a question of funding or the question that just didn't hit the right pockets. But I mean, that's a part of the treatment, I think. And I'm wondering whether or not that would be a recommended treatment for people who are not even in the study as a kind of help.
I would say yes. So there's been quite a lot of research showing that CBT is effective for depression and Parkinson's disease. So that is something we would absolutely recommend. So we're working with a psychologist at Rutgers who has developed a manual specifically for people with Parkinson's disease. So there are some resources that I can actually share with you. I don't know if you could put it on your website or something.
Sure.
So yeah, how people can get access, and that's a huge problem that I don't know if we can solve, but we need to, like how people can get access to these therapies, which we know the evidence base is that they are effective, but getting access to them is such a huge problem. But there are other things that people can do as well. Things like mindfulness and meditation, that's been shown to be very helpful for Parkinson's and depression and anxiety. And there are resources which I can share with you, and we share with our participants as well.
It's interesting because when we were talking to people with Alzheimer's, one of the questions that I think Reverend Clayton had asked is, what are the kind of things that you can do to maybe help you in terms of not being a patient? They were saying mindfulness, puzzles, playing chess, taking up a language.
Yeah.
Is that also true for Parkinson's?
It is, and I would add to that, and I'd say that this is probably the most important, is exercise. So that's the only thing that's been, so right now for Parkinson's, there are no disease modifying treatments. It's all kind of symptomatic by replenishing this dopamine. Although I think with foundations like the Michael J. Fox Foundation, I think there will be a cure, but not yet. But the only thing that they've shown that actually is neuroprotective and does slow the progression of the disease is exercise. So it's couldn't be more important, yeah. And because we think it's neuroprotective by doing things like reducing inflammation and increasing a protein in the brain called BDNF, brain-derived neurotrophic factor. Exercise can be neuroprotective and then slow the degeneration of the neurons.
I'm going to exercise right after the show.
Good. Everyone should. And
Dr.
whether you have Parkinson's or not, like as you age, we need to protect our brains, right? And exercise is, I would say, the best way to do that.
Reverend Clayton?
Yes. How bad is sugar? You know, like stuff like Reverend Perry eats, you know, cakes and pies. How serious something like that for a person who may have Parkinson's? You know, you said exercise is vital, and usually diet goes along with exercise. So, but I understand sugar is a terrible thing.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not a dietitian, but I would say healthy eating and lifestyle alongside exercise is great. I think it would be a bit mean or harsh to say no sugar whatsoever. You know, people need some pleasure in life. But yeah, I would say a healthy diet. There is a lot of research on things that are neuroprotective, things like blueberries and nuts. Things that have precursors to certain neurotransmitters. So nuts are very good for tryptophan, for serotonin, and for dopamine. So yeah, but I'm not gonna say no sugar. That's too mean. And I'm not a dietitian, so people should take this advice with a grain of salt.
What is, we have about 10 or 12 minutes, everybody. So as the spirit moves you and thoughts kind of cross your consciousness, I was wondering, Dr. Holmes, and you mentioned that you've already seen some evidence of improvement. Has anything really surprised you thus far in the study, or have you had to do any course correction?
That's a great question, and that, yeah, in terms of like architect and changing design, yeah. So Parkinson's can affect people's sense of smell, and that's one of the first symptoms actually before the onset of the motor symptoms. So before diagnosis, people report a loss of sense of smell. We think it affects olfactory function in the brain. So anecdotally, and this wasn't in our study design, but I think our first 2 participants just reported that they had not been able to smell, and the first said that he'd smelled fried chicken for the first time in many, many years. And so we've added scratch and sniff tests. So it's a test where people scratch different smells and they have to identify them, and it's really quite difficult. But we've added that pre and post because we think that maybe ketamine could be helping people's sense of smell.
And in terms of the assessment of people's eligibility for the study, just when you mentioned the sense of smell, we've heard so much about COVID impacting in some people their sense of smell. So is that something you think is also a factor that you might have to take into consideration for a participant, whether he or she has had COVID?
We would assess that. Yeah, and there could be a link, but really it's one of the main non-motor symptoms of Parkinson's is this loss of smell. So we ask people, you know, when they first noticed that, and it's usually 5 to 10 years before the onset of their motor symptoms.
Reverend Perry, I see his synapses. I can't see into his brain, but I've looked into his brain in my dreams many times, and I don't want to tell you everything I've seen there. But any thoughts you might have as we wind down?
No, I think that's you know, Dr. Holmes has given given us pause to think about not only the sense of smell, but other senses that may be affected. You know, sight, hearing, because they all kind of work together. They're all connected. Finally connected together. I mean, we're created in such a way. It's like it had to be by design. So when these things are not working, you know, we had people in a study, Dr. Holmes, who were suffering from headaches. And so one doctor suggested that just give them medication. Another doctor said, you know, send them to an ophthalmologist, because all of these things are related. So you really don't know. And each one has a specialty. And the specialty people are not talking to each other because everybody's doing their own study. It would just be so great if we could include you know, the whole team here.
I completely agree. And that's like one of the goals, right? Is to get psychiatrists and neurologists to talk and create a bridge between psychiatry and neurology. Because it's the one brain, it's all connected, but there isn't. And yeah, eyes, like there's so many connections with Parkinson's disease, and a lot of people with Parkinson's have skin disorders, so they have dermatologists, and I think that's related to inflammation, which I think is part of the disease process as well. And eyes, a lot of people with Parkinson's have problems with their eyes as well. So you've just hit the nail on the head there. There's so many things that are affected and all interlinked, and people need to talk more so that we can have a more holistic understanding of what's going on and then treat it effectively with many different things together. I don't think there's going to be one cure for mental health or for Parkinson's disease. I think it could be many things, including exercise.
Reverend Clayton?
I'm just amazed at this conversation this morning as how people who are suffering from depression and Parkinson's are getting help, and it's unlimited what can happen if more people would agree to be a part of a study like this. So Dr. Holmes, we tip our hats to you, and we're just grateful for this great work that you're doing. And you've helped me tremendously just listening to these shoe times. Thank you so much.
And on that note, Dr. Holmes, share the telephone number again, if you would.
Yep. So 475-287-9521.
Excellent.
And is it difficult for people? I know there are exclusions, like you said, coronary and some other things, but is it difficult for a person to become a part of the study?
No, and we try to make it as easy as possible. But actually, I shouldn't just say no. It takes a lot of people's time and courage to come and do a research study. But we try and make it as easy as possible, and we facilitate transportation. We've had people fly in from Oregon, come down from Maine, Massachusetts, Rhode Island. We have someone coming from Tennessee, and so we really try and make things easy for people. But that's a lot of courage to come to a different state and take part in a trial to do something to, you know, help yourself, but it's kind of unknown. But I think a lot of people that take part, yes, they're looking to help their own symptoms, but they're contributing to research that will ultimately, I think, help other people too.
Do you think obesity has, because that's one of the things about exercise and sugar and all these other things, do you find that people who have Parkinson's also suffer from obesity?
I don't know if there's a direct link, but I think there are risk factors, and that could be one. I think there is actually a link between diabetes and Parkinson's disease, and that could be related to inflammation as well. And that goes back to kind of what was talked about at the beginning, is that that there are some genes that are associated with Parkinson's, but it's a lot of environmental factors as well. And so, yes, there's no cure, but there are things that we know that can reduce the risk or reduce that disease progression. to try and minimize these environmental risk factors. And I do think more research needs to be done in terms of environmental toxins, whether people exposed to those. There is quite a lot of evidence that there's a link with that now.
Dr. Holmes, I've been trying, thinking that one of the ways that I might avoid this trap is to take prebiotics and probiotics. Do you think they help?
I think that there is a link between inflammation and healthy, the gut-brain axis. Absolutely. I don't know if that's been proven, but I think doing things that can make you healthier and reduce inflammation, I think could be protective. Yes.
Thank you.
We have about 3 minutes, everybody. So as we wind down, Dr. Holmes, I wondered what's I'm not going to ask you your age, but what's God willing, you'll be around for a few more decades. What's cooking down the road in terms of what's on your plate from a scientific discovery and research standpoint?
That's a great question. So my research before was in depression, and now I'm personally interested in Parkinson's because my father actually has Parkinson's. So this is now like the thing that I am doing and dedicated to for the rest of my career and probably life, is to try and bridge psychiatry and neurology, not just for Parkinson's, but other neurodegenerative diseases like Alzheimer's, where depression and anxiety are very common, but the treatments are just not as effective as they should be. So to just look at more treatments that I think could be neuroprotective, and combine that with therapy, with psychological approaches to actually meaningfully help people, as well as understanding brain mechanisms with brain imaging.
Gentlemen, any thoughts? One more question came to my mind, but I don't want to hog the mic.
No, I would just hope one day that we could do a show and put the neurologists, psychologists, and
Together.
this all together and have this open conversation of how we can work together. That would be awesome.
That's great.
That would be a great idea. Reverend Clayton?
Yes, Tom. This study again, or speaking of ketamine, with all the wonderful things that we've heard Dr. Holmes share with us today, I think it's important that we address the fact that there's some people who use it illegally, and that might keep some people from becoming a part of a study like this. But I use a simple analogy that we heat our homes with with fire, in a sense, and controlled. It does a wonderful thing. It keeps our homes warm. It cooks our food, etc. And ketamine, with a trained physician and scientist, it can do great things for us. So, just want to share that.
Absolutely agree. Okay, can I end with one thing that
you had in fact you literally have the last word.
Amazing. So
words, I should say.
There's a national plan to end Parkinson's Act that's just recently been passed by the House. So I think it has to go through the Senate, and then it's going to be into law that we need to solve this problem. I've been asked by actually one of our participants to help spread the word that if people can call their senators to try and encourage this act to be passed into law, I think it's really important. I think that we can find a cure because we know the pathology. So yeah.
Do you know the name of the bill?
I think it's called the National Plan to End Parkinson's Act or Bill. I'm not from this country, so I don't know. National Plan to End Parkinson's. People can search for that.
Perfect.
Excellent. Gentlemen, young ladies, I'll call you young. It's certainly relative to us. It's been a pleasure. Hope to do it again. And again, Reverend Perry's comment about kind of exploring the Gestalt and the context and the interdisciplinary effect that's so important in all of everything that we do these days. It gets maximize the knowledge that's available. I want to thank everyone for the show, And just let's be well. Let's exercise.
Yes.
Think positive and share.
Thank you so much, Tom.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
As I got another rhyme, another rhythm for y'all to listen. I'm never quitting on my mission. I'ma roll with what I'm giving. Got some ambition, this new edition, filling positions. Looking at the void in myself and feeling what's missing. Better watch the way you going. Better go in the right direction. In the moment you stressing, but you gon' be counting blessings. And I know